So while most of the content on this channel has been Final Fantasy related, one of my other favourite franchises is Monster Hunter. And not just for the combat. I love the world, the ecology, and the creature design. It appeals to that kid who once recorded nature documentaries on VHS tapes and took them into school, expecting everyone else to find them just as interesting as I did. Usually vainly. Monster Hunter Wilds has climbed the charts to become possibly my favourite in the franchise, despite its many flaws. And like any Wilds fan, I am really excited for the reveal of the expansion this summer, and I've been imagining the potential new biomes, the new returning monsters, and the fresh subspecies and variants we might encounter in it. A lot of Monster Hunter fans have already put together their own wishlist for the expansion. This is mine. But I also don't want it to just be a list of my personal faves, as fun as that is. So, I looked back at the recent expansions, Iceborne and Sunbreak, in order to make some predictions. So, what patterns do we have? The script for this video ended up well in excess of 5,000 words, so I've decided to split it. This video is going to cover my predictions for returning monsters, including potential elder dragons, while the next is going to discuss my thoughts on potential new subspecies, biomes, and completely new additions to the franchise. In the case of both, however, it's important to set up some general preliminaries. If you want to just jump straight to the predictions and not faff around with my baseline assumptions, feel free to skip to the timestamp in the video. Both Iceborne and Sunbreak have added 2 new biomes. Of these, one has been chiefly a singular biome, i.e. the Hoarfrost Reach and the Jungle, and the other has been a multi-biome map, the Citadel and the Guiding Lands respectively. By the end of their title updates, both expansions have added somewhere between 32 and 35 monsters, but Sunbreak had a smaller roster on launch and expanded significantly in the title updates, whereas Iceborne started with a larger base roster and only added 1 or 2 monsters per update. Both expansions have added in the region of 5 completely new monsters, including the new flagship and the final boss. I am including Espinas in the equation for Sunbreak, given it was their mainline debut. Both expansions have added subspecies or variants for around half the new large monster roster, 9 of 18 in Iceborne, and 5 of 11 in Sunbreak. Both also added new subspecies or variants for returning species. The rest of the roster is made up of returners. I'm going to assume Wilds will veer closer to World in its pattern, with a larger base roster and smaller title updates. I'm going to put my count at roughly 28 new monsters in the base expansion. This is technically 1 higher than Iceborne, which probably seems weird given Wilds' generally smaller roster, but there's a reason for this. Spoilers for mild data mining ahead. I recently found out from Wilds data miners that Wilds was originally intended to have 5 title updates rather than the 4 we got, with the 5th having been cut somewhere between Title Update 2 and Title Update 3, likely so the development team could work on the game's crippling performance issues on PC. This absent title update was intended to include Zinogre, and also, although this is slightly more sketchy, Shigaru Magala. I am going to assume that these 2 will be in the expansion, and since development on them was likely fairly far along, given that they were originally intended for title updates, they could be considered quote-unquote additional to the intended expansion roster. This is probably overly optimistic, but we live and dream. It's my video, and I can be an optimist here. So, out of a hypothetical base roster of 28, we can already scratch out Zinogre, Shigaru, and the 5 who are going to be completely new. This leaves us with 21 new variant and subspecies and returner monsters. We're also going to do some culling here, unfortunately. Based on precedent, 2 of these spots will be going to the Metal Wraths. They could be title update monsters like Sunbreak, but Sunbreak launched with a very small initial roster, so I am going to include them here. We're now at 19. Finally, as mentioned, recent expansions have added subspecies or variants to about half the new cast. Excluding the Guardians besides Zoshia, Wilds has 15 completely new monsters. we can probably expect between 7 and 8 of the expansion roster to be taken up by these. As mentioned, I will speculate about these in a subsequent video. However, this lowers our potential returner count to around 12, and that's what I'm going to be working with going forward. As discussed, I have already covered the likelihood of Zinogre, Shigaro Magala, and the Metal Wraths returning. After eliminating these, we are left with roughly 12 returner spots for the base expansion, although this could definitely be extended in title updates, which I'm not going to consider here. There is a huge roster to pick from, so in the words of that one character from Godzilla whose name escapes me right now, let them fight. The big question for the Wilds expansion is what role the Elder Dragons are going to play. Namely, was Gogmazios in Title Update 4 the gateway to an expansion full of Elders, or was it emblematic of a story that's going to focus primarily on non-Elders, and leaves them primarily as dramatic capstones? It could really be either, and until the expansion is announced with the title like Elder Tide, to use the common one that's been floating around, we have little idea. Given this, it might be prudent to make 2 lists. One for an expansion with more Elder Dragons, and one without. This is a bit too much for this video already, so I'm just going to discuss the Elder Dragons first, and then move on to non-Elder Dragon returners. And you can kind of look at both lists and see where you land. If we have a renewed focus on Elders, I can't see us getting any less than 1 per core biome, excluding Wave Area. But which one depends on the approach taken. In a lot of the lists I've seen, people have been selecting Elder Dragons that match the inclemencies of the biomes. That is, for example, Orochi Kirin or Velkhana for the Ice Shard Cliffs. However, we could be doing the opposite. We could be selecting for Elders that indeed run counter to these inclemencies, or rather introduce their own regional instabilities, thus justifying their elimination in order to restore the ecosystems. Or some combination of both. Also, bear in mind that any of these options could be replaced by a new monster entirely. We did not have Namiel before Iceborne, for example. Elder Dragons from the Windward Plains. Kushala Daora or Amatsu, or as counter-elders, Velkhana or Orochi Kirin. The plains are conditioned by the Sand Tide, and so the most obvious candidates to return here are the Storm Dragons, that is, Kushala Daora or Amatsu. These are elders who have the potential to wield and alter the Sand Tide to their own benefit, serving as direct rivals or counters to Rada's apex status. Conversely, Velkhana or Orochi Kirin here act as counter-elders. In place of the energy and force of the Sand Tide, they bring frost, ice, and stillness, stifling the natural ecology and the cycles of the plains. As a third, wildcard option, the proximity of the Great Desert leaves space for one of the giant whale-like elders to return in the form of Gen Moran or Daren Moran, whose nearness is causing ecological disruptions to the region. Due to Wilds' love affair with Monster Hunter 4, I am relatively confident we will get either a Moran or de l'Armadur in the expansion, but most probably in a title update. I do not think we'll get both, simply due to the effort of creating a large-scale siege battle in modern graphics. The Scarlet Forest. Namiel, or Blackveil Valhazak, or Yamasukami. Namiel here takes precedence if the devs lean into an elder who takes advantage of the current inclemency. The other options run counter. Blackveil Valhazak, I'm specifically using the subspecies here because the normal Val, like normal Odegaron, is a Vale endemic, would bring the effluvium plague to the forest, unsettling the ecological balance and requiring elimination. Similar for Yamatsukami, whose voracious feeding could similarly threaten the region. I have a cephalopod bias, and also it hasn't been back since 2nd gen, so I really want Yama back here. Of the base biomes, the basin is the only one that can currently be said to already have received its bespoke Elder Dragon. Either a new Gogmazios variant, or Nakarkos, or Namiel. I am putting a variant here because of the mirrors with 4 and 4U. Dalamadur from base 4 received a variant in 4U in Shah Dalamadur. I think Gogmazios, being originally from 4U but now in base Wilds, could receive its own bespoke variant in Wilds Ultimate. This is maybe safe, but also fairly logical. It would also scratch off the new variant type for a returner from the previous expansions. The other options to me are more interesting. Take Nikakos, for example, and not just because it's a giant cuttlefish. The basin draws heavily on oceanic imagery. Heck, oil itself is the compressed remnants of oceanic life, even if its depths are overtly volcanic. Nikakos is a cephalopod-like elder dragon that clothes itself in bones, providing here a mirror to New Udra's more overtly cephalopod physiology. I think the two could have some fascinating turf wars, and I imagine it here emerging from an even deeper layer of the basin, perhaps one fed by the runoff from the Scarlet forest in order to create a more watery environment. Nikakos is fundamentally aquatic though, and leveraging it even here might be a tough shot. Related to this though, we have Namiel, here, unlike in the Scarlet Forest, acting as a kind of counter-elder, whereas in the forest, they would be the master of their own element. In the basin, they would act as a kind of counterweight and a dampener to the fire spring, disrupting the natural ecology of the space. I think it would also be really fascinating to see its own turf wars with New Udra. The Ice Shard Cliffs. Velkana, or Oroshi Kirin, or Shigaru Magala. Velkana and Oroshi Kirin are here for ice, obviously, but also for mobility. The Ice Shard Cliffs suffer from not having Jin Dahad present on the map in the same way as the other biome apexes. Having a smaller elder here allows this dynamic to work. That said, given the setup in base Wilds, I really do feel like Shigaru is likely to take this spot, and this would extend the frenzy dynamic present in Wilds' high rank to new directions and new effects. So, I kind of suspect Shigaru's going to be here and is going to act as the kind of counter-elder, as I'm framing them, for the region. Finally, to address a fan fave, I do not see Nergigante returning in the base expansion. I think their return is inevitable. They did get number 2 in the popularity poll after all, but I see them primarily as a title update monster, if, and only if, the expansion has an Elder Dragon focus, or a dramatically increased presence of Elder Dragons either within the base campaign or the title updates. Nergigante feeds on Elder Dragons, and while it could conceivably be attracted by the energies of the Dragon Torch and of Xochitl, I think it's far more likely only to appear in the case of an Elder Dragon Insurgence. I'm going to tentatively pencil them in for Title Update 2 if we have a focus on Elders in the base expansion, or if we get more Elders only in the title updates, probably a Title Update 5 edition. And so we come to the normal returners. Factoring in the Elder Dragons at 1 per region, we have between 8 and 12 spots for general returners. As is common, this will probably be a blend of fan favourites, missing ecological niches, and whoever makes sense in the biomes. We currently have 5 base biomes, including Wyveria, with likely 2 to come in the expansion. Setting aside the Elder speculation, that's 2 to 3 returners per current biome. I'm going to kind of roughly stick to this number as I go forward, but I am going to select slightly more than the 2 to 3 per zone, because I think some monsters have a more likely chance of appearing either in place or alongside others, and I think it's worth considering that. So who do we have? The Windward Plains. One returner I think is exceptionally likely here is Copper Blangonga from 2nd Gen. Copper is often held to be the first true subspecies in the franchise, since it substantially altered the combat and ecology of base Blangonga. Since Blangonga is in the base game, I think Copper is a shoo-in for the Windward Plains. Another potential returning subspecies here is Shrouded Nursilla, who similarly fits into the plains. However, including them doubles up on Paralysis Temnocerans, given the inclusion of Lalabarina in the base game, and so this is a far more tentative inclusion for me than Copper Blangonga. Including her also means including Kezu, who I'm going to cover a bit later, and it's also worth noting that Nursilla technically already has a variant in the form of the laser-spewing Nursilla clone created by Omega Planetes, although I understand it's probably heresy to mention this for some of you. In terms of other returners that are not subspecies, Diablos is a common staple of the franchise, and would fit right here in ousting Balahara from its nest. However, it also doesn't actually fit into the Windward Plains as an ecological zone. For those of you who are into the ecology and the lore of Monster Hunter, Diablos is a dedicated cactus eater, and the plains are not a cactus-rich zone. So, instead, let's go with Diablos' much-forgotten cousin, Monoblos, to bolster the roster here. Additionally, perhaps alongside Monoblos, one other potential returner, here fresh from 5th gen Rejuvenation and Sunbreak, is Daimyo Hermitor. Clad in its Monoblos skull, the gigantic Carapacian could add some much-needed variety to the roster. I don't really have much to say here, except crabs good, more crabs please. The Scarlet Forest. The forest is one of those biomes that lends itself to a bunch of returning monsters, and indeed it has the highest variety of monsters in base wilds at this point, given the inclusion of Mizutsune and Lagiacrus. I am going to go out of my way here and maybe break rank with some of the other videos I've seen, in that I do not think we will be getting returners like Green Kongolala, Purple Gypsaros, or Blue Yankutku. I could see a small case for the latter, or even the first of these, if they are reimagined on the lines of Black Diablos as a breeding season male, but I think it's far more probable that the movesets of these OG subspecies will just be implemented into the Master Rank kits of their respective normal species. I could be wrong about this though. I think if these are included, I really hope the roster is bolstered up to an initial count somewhere in the early 30s, because they are not substantial overhauls of their base models. With that stated, however, who do I think gets to be in the Scarlet Forest? Najarala is one I would love to see here. It fits the biome, and now they have the Leviathan skeleton working well, I think it's time for the Snake Wyverns to get a bit of love. That said, logistically speaking, I only think it's likely if the skeleton gets more general usage. I can't see them using the resources for it only for Najarala themselves. Celtus and Celtus Queen would also be appreciated returners, perhaps with a new spin on the pack dynamic. I really want to imagine the Queen being attended by a small harem of Celtus in Wilds, perhaps 2 or 3 rather than just 1. It's worth noting here that both Najarala and the Celtus duo are originally from Monster Hunter 4, and so I feel like one of them could make a really good returner, and I think which one probably depends on dev resources and what other new monsters and monster skeletons they may be trying out. Another returner from 1st gen, and then revitalized in 5th gen in Monster Hunter World that I do really want to see here is young Garuga. While I think it's possible Wilds does Kutku without Garuga like World did Garuga without Kutku, I really want to see the environmental interaction between these species. Additionally, Garuga is a monster with multiple variants based solely upon its injuries and the adaptations to and disposition from these injuries. I think it would be interesting if the game built upon the deviant light mechanics it used in Title Update 1 Mizutsune, and integrated more moves unique to Scarred, Deadeye, or even One-Eared young Garuga, based on the progression of the fight and the injuries sustained against the hunter. This is a dynamic that I can really see coming back in a big way in the expansion, but it remains to be seen. The Oilwell Basin. Much like the other Gen 1 subspecies, I do not really see Black Gravios making an appearance here. Rather, I expect any of its additional moves to be integrated into G-Rank Gravios. I'm going to imagine more general returners here. The upper levels of the basin are relatively poorly occupied, and I think one returner who could fill this niche is Tetsukabra. Chadakabra is lonely as the only amphibian in Wilds currently, other than Galadron, and a returner from 4 could bolster the amphibian offerings in Wilds. The upper basin is essentially a swamp biome with dimensions of cave, and Tetsukabra fits nicely here. Another returner I feel is likely here on the lower levels is Agnaktor. Wilds is rich with Leviathans already, and Agnaktor fits neatly into that existing roster. Also, despite the prevalence of Leviathans in Wilds in general, the Oilwell Basin lacks one entirely. Throw in the Oroctors as well for flavour. And with Tetsukabra in tow, this could be the refuge for the Rise bait and switches. For our third entry to the basin, we have a few options. One recent addition to the franchise that I would love to see return here is Rachna Kadaki. Wilds is the first game with 2 distinct Temnocerans, so let's make it all 3. Rachna fits both the basin and master rank by being a high-tier fire monster, and it'd also be interesting to see her tangle with Nursilla. Given that Rachna is based on a pelican spider, and pelican spiders are, well, dedicated spider eaters. Alternatively, an equal high-tier returner to the basin could be Glavenus. I really enjoyed Glavenus' fight in World, and the location in the basin potentially allows the devs to lean into the same deviant-style ecology they used with Mizutsune, and could also use with Yangaruga, or indeed with Daimyo Hermitor, if they make it in. That is namely Hellblade Glavenus. Lean into Glavenus' place in the lower levels of the basin to cultivate Hellblade-esque moves, and demonstrate the potential emergence of deviant forms from circumstance. And as a companion to a potential Daimyo Hermitor on the plains, Shogun Cyanator could also integrate well into the basin, and perhaps even unlock its deviant Rust Razor form through seizing a Glavenus skull as a shell. The Ice Shard Cliffs. The cliffs are an interesting and actually quite difficult biome because a substantial portion of potential ice returners simply do not work here. Gammoth? Too big. Zamtrios? Also needs a bit too much space, as does Lagombi. They both float around a lot. We need ice or ice-adjacent monsters who work well with a crumbling urban environment of towers and bridges. Ones that can potentially take advantage of the corridors and the spacing here. Kezu could be good here. It fits the environment, it's unsettling, it's Kezu. Kezu appearing could also lay the groundwork for Shrouded Nursilla, as mentioned earlier, although see my comment about status overlap with Lalabarina. Setting aside Kezu, Giginox is another returner who fits here. Giginox is, perhaps ironically, the one more closely associated with ice environments, and speaking on a personal level, I find its design a bit more interesting and unsettling. Its young, the Gigi also, could in a weird way parallel the scores of Nursilla hatchlings in the environment. I do not think we will ever get both Kezu and Giginox in a modern game alongside each other. I think they overlap a bit too much. But Kezu was in Rise, so let Giginox be in Wilds. Or just bring Kezu over and save on some dev resources, I guess. My second pick here for returners is Barioth. I feel that Barioth could work really well in the cliffs, making use of its speed to spring off walls and kind of ambush you from behind. Frostfang was also among my favourite variants in World, and this opens the door to its return. Barioth is in both 5th gen games though, but he's cool and he fits, but he might need a bit of a break. 2 potential returners from Rise that I could also see working quite well on the cliffs are Gos Harag and Lunagaron. I think both would really fit the aesthetics and the design of the biome, with Goss stalking the frozen corridors in search of prey like some serial killer in an old derelict building, and Lunagaron serving as the more agile option, perhaps overlapping a bit too strongly with Barioth. It would also be logical to reimagine Lunagardon here, perhaps as a quasi-pack animal. Hunting in pairs along the cliffs may be similar to Ajarakan in the basin. Both Goss and Luna would be solid natural additions to the cliffs. The ruins of Wyveria. Wyveria is an odd biome. In many ways, it serves as analogous to the Guiding Lands in World, namely that it is a nutrient-rich endgame environment where powerful monsters from other regions come together and fight. It also serves as host to its own endemic species, that is the Guardians and Shay Wu. It is also primarily a cave biome. I think it's very likely we'll get at least one new Guardian construct in the expansion. Guardian interactions with Wilk are all element based, and we currently lack either a water or an ice Guardian. Since two of the Guardians that we see are New World returners, I'm going to postulate either a Guardian Legiana for ice, or a Guardian Coral Puke Puke for water to fill out this missing niche. Both are really cool monsters I would love to see return, and both fit the gaps and current theming of the Guardians. We could also get a Guardian version of one of the other returners or the new subspecies if it fits this niche. Guardian Barioth could go pretty hard, for example, perhaps living up to its mythos as the White Knight. Free space. So, while these are my personal choices, there are a few world favourites that I could see also slot into any of these. The ones at the top of my list are Tigrex and Brachydios. Tigrex was a monster I was honestly quite disappointed with in World, although I enjoyed its brute subspecies a lot more than the base form. I think it could fit happily into the basin, or Wyveria, or the plains, as could Brachydios, but primarily in the basin, I think. I'd really be happy to see any of these two return in Wilds, particularly with the inclusion of offset attacks and power clashes that I think could work really well against them. I've also not really included any invader monsters here. This includes Deviljho, Bazelgeuse, and even Rajang. Wilds as a game doesn't seem to lend itself that well to invader dynamics. The base game doesn't have any. Arkveld appears on all maps, but she mostly just minds her own business, loiters about preening her chain blades. Most monsters aside from the apexes appear on 2 or 3 maps in the base game already. Chemetry, Slalabarina, Ajarakan, Hirabami, Mizutsune, Soregios, and Gormagala all appear in Wyveria, as well as their base maps. Rathian can be found from the plains to the basin, Rathalos from the forest to the basin to Wyveria, Gypsaros moonlights on the cliffs to be hunted by Nursella, while Yunkutku appears there primarily in a frenzy. I guess Gormagala just made them get really lost. Besides the Guardians, the only non-Apex monsters who keep to a single map are Chadacabra, Lagiacrus, the 2 monkeys, and Rompopolo. While it's certainly possible that the expansion will include a renewed focus on dedicated invaders, for now they're sitting here in this free space. Even without talking about what I see as the new subspecies and potential new species added to the expansion, this video is coming up on 40 minutes long. If you're still here, thank you so much. I've been fixated on Monster Hunter Wilds for a really long time, and I really wanted to get these thoughts and predictions out before the expansion announcement. A lot of returners are IMO going to depend on what the new biomes are in the expansion, because while 3 of the 5 newbies will likely go towards fleshing that out, like Beatodus and Banbaro and Iceborne, or the 3 Lords in Sunbreak, these zones will also be filled with returning monsters and new subspecies and variants. Especially if we get 2 zones like Iceborne and Sunbreak, and both are given Apex monsters. Even if one of these doubles as the flagship, that's still only 2 spots for regular large monsters, and I suspect the flagship will be their own beast. Either way, I wanted to say thank you for being here, and please watch the second video if you're interested in that. This has been Laraika Laray, signing off.
Did I go and burst the bubble? Promise more than I can give. I tried to touch its color. cosmic sheen, but today all I smell is chlorine. Yesterday I was deep sea diving, but today I found a floor. Run my fingers over its surface, but I couldn't find a door.